today we have with us Azeez Gupta, who is an engineer, a management consultant, and a social enterprise leader, and is passionate about education, empowerment, and leading large-scale organizations focused on innovation and transformative social impact. He has been an Education Innovation Fellow at Harvard University, led and scaled the nascent youth skills development program, and is currently heading strategic initiatives at Pratham Education Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us, Azeez.
Hi Deepak, this is my pleasure to join you and happy to be chatting with you just now.
Same here. So you've led the award-winning workforce development program and managed a staff of 1,500 employees across 16 states. What are the key learnings from the same that can help an organization in development sector to make its workforce more adaptive?
Right. I think one major, learning that we had over time was that one of the biggest impediments to the workforce being adaptable or being able to respond to new sort of situations, new requirements, is just a mindset thing, right? So while of course on the skill side you can do a lot, so building more general skills, things like communication, analysis, and so on. But often people sort of come in or get used to a particular role, a particular mode of working, right, a particular goal. And so if you have to shift, and I think in the social impact sector, you need to shift often quite a lot, right? Because the ecosystem outside will change, your funding may change, the need on the ground may change. And so you need to be able to respond to that, right? Rather than continue with something that is tried and tested or that your team may be used to. And so I think instilling into people right from the beginning that this is a plan for now or for this year or for a couple of years, but it may change. And that you will also have to be ready to change and we'll support you to do it. I think that's important. And then as they go through one or two pivots, people start actually even realizing that this is something to be expected. It's not a shock. I mean, if it happens, then they're sort of eager to go with the new opportunity. Right? And I think along with that, it's also important for people to know that often with change comes growth. And when there's growth, then people also get to do more things, new things, different things. So they should actually look forward to it as opposed to sort of, dreading any sort of change.
And you have also managed and worked on government partnerships for the organization. What would you say such partnerships add to an intervention, and what key pointers are required to be able to make it a balanced one?
Right. So I think two major things that come from having a partnership with the government, right, or having sort of the government involved in whatever you're doing, are one, scale, and two, sustainability. Right, and I think those two things are the holy grail of what most social impact organizations are looking for. In terms of scale, right, the government all said and done continues to be the major sort of organization working with low-income people, right? Whether it's in education or in any other sector, and even now the bottom 50% of the population who can't afford anything else are still going to government schools, right? And so if you want to reach that segment, partnering with the government does become very important. And the other thing is that, of course, the government has a lot of trust, right, which often nonprofits don't necessarily have, especially when scaling. And so working with the government and partnering with them helps you to take on that trust, right, to sort of piggyback off that trust that governments already have. Second is sustainability, because all said and done, no nonprofit wants to or can work in an area forever, or in geography, or with a set of folks forever. And so there has to be an exit plan, or there has to be a game plan for how the intervention becomes sustainable. And I think the two ways majorly of doing that, one is sort of making communities self-sufficient, and the other is to sort of be able to instill in government the capability and the will to go and do this on their own later without support as well. And so the hope for sustainability is what government offers, and the scale. I think mostly a lot of organizations have achieved scale. I think sustainability has been harder to come by, and I think everyone is still figuring out how to do that.
Now, if you talk about scale, so Pratham obviously has achieved a scale right now. So what are the other strategic initiatives like you are kind of undertaking for the organization to build more capacity for the interventions?
Right. So I think we're doing a range of things, right? Both programmatic and non-programmatic. And I think an organization sort of needs to strengthen itself on both counts. On the programmatic side, I think one feature of Pratham is that Pratham is constantly sort of always trying to innovate and trying to come up with new solutions, even solutions that may disrupt their existing models. Right? And I think that way we call ourselves a learning organization, an organization that has actually changed models and strategies over time willingly and thinking that that's a good thing, right? Because I mean, being stuck on one thing, while admirable in some ways, but also sort of inhibits you when the system and environment changes. So I think, for example, while we are implementing remedial learning programs at a large scale, which we have been doing for quite some time, but we're also trying to sort of have now develop models and move into situations where we can help people not fall behind in the first place. Right, and to do that, we are doing multiple things. We're trying to do things for higher age groups, right, grade 6 and above, using technology, and to see that can you help kids who know how to read and do basic math, but can you help them learn 21st century skills, learn higher order skills that will help them in the unorganized sector where most of them are going to end up. So I think on that side, there are a number of initiatives that we are trying to build upon and trying to build sort of new models that are tried and tested and measurable, so that those can benefit children and youth. I think the other thing on the non-programmatic side, I think there's a lot of efforts on to improve many of our systems and our processes. And I think often, Pratham sort of has scaled manyfold over the last few years. And, to keep up with that growth and that scale, we are now sort of working in around more than 20 states with 7,000 employees. So our processes on finance, talent management, capacity building, all of those we really investing a lot of effort into trying to build up.
And how do you see the shift in the domain of education occurring right now? So and what are the new innovations or interventions that you at Pratham are seeing or otherwise in the whole domain?
Yeah, what I'm generally seeing, right? I think COVID, I mean, this answer might have been different sort of a couple of months ago, right? And yes. Post-COVID and post-COVID. And I think COVID has really accelerated a lot of the changes that might have happened, say, over 5 to 10 years, but that may actually not happen in 1 to 2 years. I think what we're seeing is, a bigger role for technology for sure, right? And right now when schools are closed, there is no other option. So many different organizations are doing something on the fronts of digital content and delivery and so on. And Pratham is one of the leaders in that space. Linked to that, I think also trying to figure out that how do you create a community aspect of learning, right? How do you get the communities more involved, homes more involved in that? And how do you create a linkage perhaps between even schools and communities, right? So I think those are some of the next frontiers, and how can you use technology to enable many of these things, especially given that, so many parents now have data connections, smartphones, or may even, be able to buy tablets and other things in the future. So I think this answer sort of might have been new 2 months ago, but I think by now anyone you talk to more or less is going to be saying the same.
Talking about your role as an Education Innovation Fellow at the Harvard University, you selected, funded, and advised Harvard students working on education startups. Yeah. So what is the difference in approach that you found in regard to the students working on those startups, and how do you see their ideologies differentiating in terms of their approach?
Right. So, I think one thing is that it was a very interesting experience to look at all these sort of wide range of people looking at wide range of solutions, right? And I think it really brought home that there are so many potential solutions in the education ecosystem. And it sort of makes you think, right, that will you actually need all of these to come together and work, or will it be that, one or two of them are going to, really create that delta change in the ecosystem that we're looking at, right? And so many people are looking at sort of changes at a community level, right, or at a small sort of group level, 1 classroom, 1 school, 10 schools. Some are trying to change the whole sort of ecosystem and so on and so forth. So that ways we see a lot of difference. And I think one thing that we saw also different between India and the US is that I think in the US, because the system is broadly better than, for example, in India, even though there are a lot of limitations there as well. So the solutions are very much targeted at a very specific subproblem. For example, there may be somebody working on how to create solutions for people with ADHD or dyslexia. So there will be particular context, right? And solutions may, for example, be role modeling for a particular group from people from that community and all of that. Whereas in India, typically because the solution is the system as a whole is so broken that whatever solutions you sort of tend to be quite broad brush. They may have a particular leader, lever, right? So somebody may focus on school leadership, somebody may focus on teacher training, somebody may look at pedagogic reforms, etc., etc. But those will more or less be the same across different contexts, across different segments of the population, broadly across the bottom 50%, it'll be similar, right? And so I think hopefully at some point we're able to solve the basic things, right, and the broad brush things, to be able to come to points where we can actually look at such detailed points, which people in the US are doing.
And talking about the scale at which Pratham works, it requires a considerable thought in domains of accountability, logistics, and communication. So how have you worked on those domains to ensure a seamless functioning for the organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely quite challenging, right? Pratham has 7,000 employees across different programs, geographies, teams, and so on. And in fact, as in any other organization, right, people can come and go. So while many of these people are long-time, sort of employees and participants in Pratham work, but others may have come relatively recently. So definitely logistics and communication, training, accountability, all of that is a challenge. I think one good thing that Pratham has had typically going for itself is the culture that we've built over many years. So that culture has generally worked on trust. It's worked on empowering people at the field level, right? From the field to the management, everyone sort of is generally empowered. And so in that way, I think it's been quite useful, and the mindset of the organization has been to create impact. I think linked to that, we also have in place very good measurement systems. And I think measurement is actually a good way of being able to hold accountability on outcomes and not inputs. Right? And I think Pratham has been sort of talking about looking at outcomes in education more than the inputs in this education system broadly. But I think that's also how we have been looking at sort of work within our teams, that we are able to measure the sort of impact on learning outcomes different teams or different individuals have, and hold them accountable to that, as opposed to, for example, having a GPS tag saying that did you go here or there, or how many hours or timestamps. Rather than that, we prefer to sort of look at outcomes, right? So I think that has worked quite well. And on the communication front, I think we've definitely, with WhatsApp and so on, right, all of that has become substantially easier, and I'm on God knows how many WhatsApp groups, right, which keep me. So I think all those things have helped, but I think combination of measurement and trust has kept that accountability and communication going, and that's been even more critical actually now with COVID and all of that. And for example, we've seen quite easy communication on things like Zoom, where we've reached out to all 7,000 employees on Zoom in a cascading way to be able to tell them what's the situation, what we are doing, and so on. And that might happen more and more. We've also started town halls for our employees where they can sort of listen in and understand what's happened and hear from the leadership. So I think those things are becoming bigger possibilities on the communication side through technology, and I think that's what other organizations I'm sure should also look to do.
So like you mentioned that you're working with around 7,000 employee range. So what would be some of the advices that you could give to the NGOs or the social enterprises, or say a CSR wing of a corporate, to kind of cope up with the current situation, and how can they foresee the education domain changing and work around it?
Right. I think one broad sort of advice that I would generally want to give to either sort of social enterprises or funders, right, corporates who are funding or foundations, is, I guess, probably to try and look at things that will create a step change in the situation. So while, I mean, it's quite tempting to think of something that is going to create a small change and slowly and systematically improve things, but systems are so broken that for anything to stick, right, I think the idea has to be quite disruptive and has to sort of create a big change fairly quickly, because otherwise the sort of momentum and the confidence won't happen. And I see far too many funders and foundations still looking and funding the old, many traditional ideas, whether it's outfitting a school better or many other things of that sort, right, which generally have not worked, right? And India's education system actually hasn't sort of improved over the last 20-25 years. There are some things that are now happening, but funders should also therefore look at things which actually show measurable impact and promise, and at a big enough scale, and look at funding those, rather than look within their backyard and say that let me add some benches or tables to some schools, right? And unfortunately, we see, I think, too much of that happening. At least that's my view. And I think now, that advice is sort of a constant, I would feel, and now looking at COVID, right, and what's happening from there, I think organizations will have to be quite flexible this year in terms of what has to be done. And so will sort of organizations and funders both, because the same old programs that were running earlier and creating impact may not create impact now. In fact, to some extent, I think what we are worried about is that, while enrollment wasn't the problem earlier, right, maybe we may find that children may be less willing to come back, or attendance or other things, right? I mean, there may be psychological scars that may happen, and so maybe focus may need to be on other things than what was originally the plan for this year. So I would encourage funders and organizations to sort of work together and look at what is needed to be done in this context now, and while in the overall grand scheme of things, trying to go for bolder solutions or solutions that are different from the norm.
Indeed. So that brings us to the close of the conversation. So any concluding remarks that you would like for the viewers to go away with around the domain or around the initiatives that you're doing, or any suggestions?
So I think if I was to sort of think about advice, right, or concluding thoughts, is to sort of, I think, look at models that will involve communities much more and that will involve technology much more. And so those things may relatively be, be sort of newer, more risky, more challenging, whatever, more disruptive, right? As opposed to sort of funding more standard models, the models where you can work very safely and report to your CSR committee or somebody else that this is happening. But I would urge all these organizations and companies to actually look for these sorts of different solutions which will create impact.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Azeez. It's been a pleasure having you.